Hello, 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 and welcome to Inner Work for Greater Good. My name is Emily Eldridge, as always, and I'm here to share the inner work that is absolutely necessary for us to make the biggest possible difference in the world. And so if this is your first time watching my show, hello, hello. I'm so happy to have you, and I hope that I can provide you with great information to learn today that will help you with your journey. So let me just tell you right now, I'm actually in Tucson, Arizona, moving out of a house that my husband and I have been in for 7 years. So if you were to see the setup right now, you'd see I've got boxes on top of this mattress. You can even see we've been taking stuff off of the walls. So sorry for the very bare and shaky, see there it is, like every time I move, this moves, shaky situation right now. But I'm doing the best I can given that I'm traveling and don't have a whole lot to work with right now. But I'm still here and we're still talking, and this is going to be great. Today, the conversation I want to have is about burnout. Okay, so let me just start with the definition of burnout, because I think a lot of people experience burnout. I have definitely experienced burnout in my life, and it can show up in work, it can show up in relationships. And I think it's really important to also learn to identify when we're feeling burned out. And then what I'm really going to talk about today is burnout from a change light perspective, if you will, from an X powers and M powers perspective. I spent a lot of videos episodes prior to this one talking about the X powers and the M powers, the 3 types of each. And I'll give you a quick rundown as I talk about burnout when it comes to them in this episode. But especially if you haven't seen those episodes, definitely go back and learn all about the 3 types of X powers, aka your inner struggles, and the 3 types of M powers, aka the parts of you whose job it is to support you in living your truth. So let's start first with the definition of burnout. So this is just a quick definition that I saw, it's basically it was first coined by the psychologist Herbert Freudenberger in the 70s, and it's described as a severe stress condition that leads to severe physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. So it's worse than just feeling momentarily fatigued. It actually makes it really challenging to cope with stress and to handle day-to-day responsibilities, whether they be professional or personal or both. It really feels, when you're burned out, it feels like you have nothing left. It's like you are empty on the inside, empty of energy, energetically empty, like you just have nothing left to give. And that you may dread getting out of bed each morning. You might feel very pessimistic and feel hopeless. There are also other signs basically of burnout. So I'll just list a few of them: exhaustion, isolation, escape fantasies, irritability, frequent illness. I've also seen written like cynicism, feeling very cynical about the world, and maybe your ability to affect change within it. So these are all things. I think also irritability is a good one. I think when we think of burnout, we think of like, oh, I'm just really, really tired or exhausted, or I've burned out. But also it can manifest as being very irritable and annoyed and impatient and overwhelmed and very, very stressed in that way. So think about those symptoms and just notice if that's something that you're dealing with right now, or that you've ever dealt with and maybe you didn't recognize it as burnout. I think that really recognizing what we're struggling with makes a big difference in our ability to handle it. And of course, it requires some amount of self-awareness and really stopping and pausing and going, okay, what's going on with me right now? Or maybe even listening, maybe other people are the ones who are saying, I think you might be burned out, or I think you seem really, really tired. So it's also really important to listen to other people's cues and feedback about what they're seeing within us, and take it as information. It doesn't mean you have to believe everything, obviously, that everybody else tells you about what they're seeing in you, but it really is about just take it as information and say, well, what if this could be true? What if I really am experiencing some burnout that I don't realize is there? So I'm going to talk about burnout. I mean, if you go online and you see, here's what burnout is, or, here's how you deal with it. I want to talk about it from a change light perspective. So from the X powers and M powers. If you've seen the previous episodes, or even if you haven't, I'll just go through real quick. The 3 types of X powers are your inner defender, inner defenders, I should say, inner controllers, and inner wounded. So the defenders are basically the ones who want to try to block any sort of pain from coming in. They are very much like they show up as the bodyguards, or the, don't come near, or like a wall, an inner wall that you have that's trying to keep people out, or keep any kind of triggers or threats or anything out, any potential pain out. Those are defenders, and those obviously develop inside of us, usually because we have been violated, because we haven't had proper boundaries, or because we feel very inferior. And as a result of feeling inferior, we can have a defender that tries to puff us up and make us feel or appear superior, or behave in a superior way to try to protect us from those really inferior feelings. Defenders don't like us to feel weak. They like us to feel strong. So that's the defender type. Then there's also the controller type of X-Power, and that's the part that's it's trying to control us or another part of us. And so classic one is the inner critic. So it's telling you you're never doing enough, or you should be doing more, or you're a failure, you've never amounted to anything. So often controllers use criticism to control us, to either keep us down or push us forward, push us too hard. Often we'll talk about that with burnout. Or they can undermine our confidence, and ultimately their intentions are good. With the defenders too, the intentions are good. They're just trying to protect us from pain, whatever way they know. But unfortunately, what happens is they end up causing us pain. So those tend to be controllers. Inner critic is a classic one. And then finally, wounded. So this is the type that basically, whereas the controllers and defenders are trying to protect us from pain, whatever way they know, or mitigate pain, whatever way they know, woundeds are the ones who are carrying the pain. Woundeds are basically that wounded inner child. Usually that's a classic one, the one that's hurting, the one that's crying, the one that's throwing a temper tantrum, the one that makes us feel sad or depressed, or although actually depression can often be a controller issue as well. So let me just clarify that. But the woundeds are the ones that are carrying that pain that resulted from having been hurt in the past. So you've got those. And so basically, usually the defender is often trying to protect the wounded, or trying to protect woundeds. Defenders are often seen in that when we do the drawing out process, when I work with my clients, or we figure out what are the struggles going on inside. Usually defenders trying to protect a wounded, or very often, or a controller is actually acting on a wounded, trying to get it to stop being in so much pain or stop crying. And oftentimes a classic dynamic there is the whole critical parent, wounded child dynamic that they talk about in therapy and everything. And so that's that inner critic that can often, it's playing out often what we learned in childhood if we had a very critical parent, and it's hurting that child inside of us, just like we were hurting as children. So those are the three types. Now, each one of these, this is what I find so interesting, is that each one of these can directly relate to why we might be experiencing burnout in our jobs, in our lives, in our relationships. And that sense of irritability, exhaustion, I have nothing left to give, feeling very cynical, feeling very isolated. So let's look first at defenders. How are defenders, or could they be related to why, if you're feeling burned out, or when you felt burned out, or in the event that you do feel burned out, just remember this. How are defenders related to this experience of burnout? Here's the thing about defenders. Again, they're trying to protect us from pain, whatever way they know, and the way defenders do it, they try to defend us from the pain. They try to block the pain, or they set up walls inside of us. They are walls inside of us that are trying to protect us. Here's what also happens, though, and I mentioned this when I talk about defenders, is that as much as their intentions are good, and sometimes their efforts really do protect us. So for example, if we were criticized a lot as a child, and then someone comes along and criticizes us, we might immediately have a defender that says, not okay. And so that defender could actually be genuinely protecting us in a way. However, one of the sort of side effects of defenders can be that they also keep us from letting others in. So when I talk about inner wall, or if you've got a bodyguard that gets very reactive anytime there's any sense of maybe somebody's going to say something mean, or it can also project into the situation its own fears. The defender can, and cause us to think things are happening in that scenario that aren't actually happening. That ultimately, what can often happen is that if we're so well defended, if we have all these walls or these, this barbed wire around us, or we have these bodyguards that are trying to keep others out so that we can stay safe within, what happens? Well, we're not then letting others in. There's no space for connection. And not only that, we then don't really allow others to help us. So think about that. Whatever situation you're in, whether it's if you're raising children, or you have a leadership position in your work, you're trying to affect some kind of change in the world and fulfill some kind of mission. If you're trying to do all of that alone, and you're not trusting others to let them help you, that can very well be because you've got a very well developed defender inside of you. And that defender is trying to protect you from feeling hurt or disappointed by others. That's another one that defenders can often try to protect us from. Because if we have been disappointed, if others have let us down, well, then you might have a defender who's like, you know what, then forget it. I'm going to do it all myself, or we might have formed that belief. And that can often be fueled by an inner defender or defenders. Never mind then, I'm just going to do it myself because I can't trust anyone else to show up for me. I can't trust that others are going to do a good enough job. There's a hyper independence is the term. I think I actually mentioned this in a previous episode. Hyper independence, that's like a form of hyper independence that can actually be born of trauma, because of the trauma of having felt very alone and isolated as children, that there was no one there to protect us. But again, the defenders that then form in response to those situations can often be the very parts of us that actually keep us from receiving the support and help that we need, and that is available to us from, that there are people we can trust. But because we've been so hurt, we aren't actually aware or fully allowing ourselves to trust those people. So what's that a recipe for? Burnout, right? Think about it. If you're trying to do everything on your own and you're not dropping your defenses enough, or you're not really relaxing enough to realize that, oh, this person's actually trying to help me, and then articulating what you need in a healthy way, et cetera. I mean, it's kind of it's a multi-level process, right? To let trust other people, and to delegate, like trust that when we delegate to them, that they will do the task properly. The point is that defenders can actually stop that from happening, because they're trying to protect us from disappointment, from pain, all kinds of things. So if you're experiencing burnout or have experienced burnout, consider that defender might be underneath that it could be preventing you. By the way, I said I'm going to talk about X powers first, but then I'm going to just briefly touch on, well, how can your M powers actually support you in coming out of burnout? So controllers. So what do controllers have to do with burnout? I referenced this a minute ago. Think about that. If you are feeling so driven and so like, I have to get this done. Or if you are like driven to succeed, or you feel like it's never enough, whatever you do, you're a perfectionist, you're feeling pushed or pressured, or you've got some kind of sense of, I'm never enough, whatever I do is never enough, I'm not good enough at this, et cetera, et cetera. Those kinds of feelings that can lead to burnout can be caused by controllers, an inner controller that's telling you that you're never doing enough, or making you feel like you're never enough or never good enough, that's pushing you beyond the point of exhaustion, that makes you feel like you have to keep going even when your body is like, I can't. That can be because of an inner controller or controllers that are controlling you and pushing you beyond a healthy boundary, beyond a healthy threshold. So that's something to remember about controllers. Controllers can often be at the core also of burnout because of that, because they don't think about what's healthy for you. They're just trying to overcompensate maybe for an insecurity that you have. They're trying to you know, trying to help you feel more accomplished. But often with controllers, they're really never satisfied. And so that's why it feels like no matter what you do or how much you do, it's never enough. It's never good enough. Or even by undermining your confidence in yourself, that can also cause burnout as well, because it feels like you're not good enough to be doing whatever you're doing. You're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling exhausted, you're feeling, you know, drained. Because oftentimes, and this is another thing just generally with X powers, they can be very draining. If you're constantly battling with these parts of you or having to contend with these messages that you've got going on inside, that's exhausting in and of itself. I was working with a client just a couple of weeks ago who was talking about being physically exhausted, and meanwhile she'd been talking about the emotions that she was struggling with, and I said, well, of course you're exhausted, because even though we think of emotions as this sort of like amorphous sort of non-physical thing, right? Because an emotion is like a feeling that we have, is they are physically exhausting and draining too. So think about it that way as well. When you're struggling with these parts while you're just trying to go about your daily duties, that's going to wear on you as well. And finally, woundeds. So what do woundeds have to do with burnout? Woundeds, as I said, carrying that emotion can be physically draining. Feeling those feelings can be very physically draining. When you've got that dynamic of, let's say, the critical parent that's acting on the wounded, and the wounded is feeling like it's never enough, that can make you feel like you're never enough. And so that's where that kind of dynamic can come in. Burnout also, is it talked about as a sense of hopelessness or despair or cynicism. And woundeds often have that attitude. That's a lot of woundeds can feel like there's nothing I can do. They tend to have a powerless stance. They think of themselves as powerless. And so if your woundeds can also be the things that are drawing you down, that are being triggered by, you know, if you've been trying and working so hard and feeling like you're not really getting anywhere, which could be because maybe you're trying too hard in one way that really isn't effective and you need to try a different way. Or, as I talked about with defenders, maybe you're trying too hard on your own and you're not allowing others to support you. The point is that wounded can get triggered and it can feel very much, see, there's no point, and feel very cynical and feel very down and feel very lacking in any energy and feel very powerless to change. And so that, again, that's one of those symptoms of burnout. And so woundeds can be at the core of burnout as well. So here's the cool thing though, that with all of these X powers playing a role in burnout, guess what? Their more empowered counterparts, those M powers, can play a role in healing that burnout. Obviously, as I've talked about a lot, what you want to do is you first really want to address the X powers and heal those, draw them out and honor them, because no amount of honoring and bringing forward your M powers can really make up entirely for the X powers that are in there, because otherwise you're just going to be dealing with this sort of binary, you know, power struggle within you, where you've got, oh, these empowers are saying all this wonderful stuff and they support you and love you, but you've still got the woundeds that are telling you that no, there's no point. Or you've got the controller that says, well, you know, you're a failure and you suck and you screwed up. Or you've got the defender who's like, we are not letting anybody in here. You know, we can't get vulnerable and ask for help. So that's why I always advocate. This is not talking about just doing one or the other. You've got to do both. In my experience, you've got to face the darkness and honor the light. And as you face that darkness, you actually bring that darkness to light. So it's all this wonderful, perfect, you know, fabulous, you know, dark transforming into light system and process. But anyway, the point is you want to first draw out those X powers at the very least, draw them out. And I talk about this in my course, in my community, community.changelight.world. You can learn all that good stuff there. I teach the techniques. But the point is you want to draw those out, because then you're going to help, it's like a release valve. You're just, by drawing it out, you're like honoring it, you're letting it come out, you're putting it out on paper as opposed to it just being all inside of you. So that's going to help a lot. But then the other side of that is with those M powers, as I mentioned. So excuse me, the three empower types are your inner sovereign, your impresario, and your free spirit. So your sovereign, if you've seen previous episodes, you know that your sovereign and your defender are correlate with one another. Your defender energies are basically distortions of your sovereign energy. And your sovereign, your inner sovereign, is the part of you that knows your truth, that knows your boundaries, what's right and wrong for you, independently of anyone else. It's connected with your spiritual center. It's connected with your sense of values and morals and ethics. It has a sense of right and wrong, both what's right and wrong for you, but also what's right and wrong in general. And so your sovereign is the one that you can call on if you're feeling burned out. It could be, actually, it probably really is. It usually is because you are giving away your power to others. You are not honoring your boundaries, your sovereignty, your needs. So that's how we get burned out, right? And we describe the burnout as it's basically where it's like you feel like you have nothing left to give. Well, then you're drained, you're empty on the inside. Energetically, it's gone everywhere else. So your sovereign can be the one that you call on to say, okay, how can I live according to what feels good and right for me, so that I can basically like bring that energy back. And actually, this is a cool exercise that you can do too, is you just almost imagine, especially if you feel like you're like pulled in all these different directions and you've got all these different responsibilities or people relying on you, or you think that you're responsible for things that maybe you're not entirely, maybe it's really not your responsibility. You know, you're just taking it on as your responsibility. You can actually energetically like bring those cords back. And actually, I've done an energy healing technique called pranic healing, and we actually cut cords. We actually energetically cut the unnecessary cords. So unnecessary is a good word, because you don't want to cut the cords between, like, you know, people who really you love and you care about and you want to maintain that. It's about the unnecessary cords. But the point is, it's all about bringing that energy in, and your sovereign can also help you recognize where you are allowing your boundaries to be violated, where you are giving away your energy when you really should be honoring yourself and trusting yourself and your own truth, and allowing the universe to support you in what you're doing and in who you are. So that's where the sovereign can come into play here, and to help you overcome burnout, help you heal from burnout. The other one, of course, the next second one, is your inner impresario. So how can your impresario support you in this? One of the great things about your impresario, I always kind of laugh, because your impresario is basically like your task, the one who's like your taskmaster, who knows what you need to do. It's a part of you that likes to do and get things done. That's very much about, you know, practicality and survival, that is good at lists and organizing, very left-brained, very logical, practical, reasonable, all that kind of stuff. And one of the techniques I teach when it comes to honoring your empowers is, I always kind of giggle about the impresario, because the one of the questions that you can ask your empowers to honor them is, what's one small thing I can do today that would feel good for you? So that's what one of those, you know, simple techniques for really bringing forward your empowers every morning and allowing them to support you. Well, I always giggle because with impresarios, it's like, your impresario will sometimes give you more than one thing. It'll be like, well, since you asked, let me tell you. And it'll be like, okay, do this. But then what you can do, I'm getting somewhere, I promise. So then what you can do though with that is, I will say, okay, if your impresario gives you a whole list of things to do, you then say, okay, we need to prioritize. Impresario, what's the one most important thing I can do? Or what's the one thing I can do today on this list that will give you the greatest satisfaction, that will make you feel the best? Now, obviously, what honors our empowers honors us as well. What feels good for our empowers feels good for us as well. But the point is, what happens is that impresario goes, oh, and immediately it knows what's the one thing, that right there, and it knows. So you're calling on your impresario to prioritize. This is all by way of saying that when it comes to burnout, oftentimes, as I mentioned, we can often think that we are, indispensable in all these different ways, or have to be hyper productive. We have to get all this done, and we are responsible for all these things. When in reality, we might be doing too much busy work, we might actually be working harder and doing more than is really necessary. So that's where calling on your impresario can really help you vroom, and focus in on what's really important. Never mind all the other noise, never mind all the overthinking and all the stuff that we think we need to do. What has priority? And so calling on your impresario to tell you what's the most important thing can help all that, but just kind of calm down. So it's not this, oh my God, I have so much to do and I'm so burned out, I'm so exhausted. Nope, just what's one thing I can do that would help give me a sense of accomplishment. And then you just keep doing that one thing, so that even though you're exhausted and you're burned out and you're overwhelmed, you're helping to clarify and calm your inner system to realize that, yeah, you may feel overwhelmed, but really there's not actually as much that you need to do that you think you need to do, or certainly not in this moment right now. So that can also help alleviate that burnout, is to allow your impresario to help you be more focused and clear on what's really important. Finally, free spirit. I often tell people that really one of the biggest things I've found, the most common issue I've found when it comes to burnout, and I've worked with clients who have been burned out, and even, had to, they were like having to let go of employees, or they were having to, really having to make a lot of big changes, or felt like they really had to make a lot of big changes because of the fact that they didn't have the energy to keep going at the pace at which they were going. And so what I always do is I always say, we need to start by honoring those empowers. And then we can also get to the root of, like, what are the X powers that have been driving them to this point, that have gotten them to this point. But one of the quickest things they can do is to start to honor those empowers. And the biggest empower I've found that can bring you out of burnout that much faster is your free spirit. So your free spirit, to summarize about the empowers, the free spirit is the part of you that's very joyful and fun-loving. It doesn't care about responsibilities. It's carefree. It loves to play. It loves to be funny. It loves to be silly. And usually the reason why we've gotten burned out, or why you may be burned out or have gotten burned out, is because you've allowed that controller and an over-energized impresario energy, if you will, to run the show, to take charge and take control. But what often happens is it was just focused on doing, is that then then the free spirit gets left behind. And the free spirit gets shafted, because it's often seen as not important for survival, right? The free spirit doesn't think in terms of, what do I need practically? What do we need to survive? No, the free spirit's like, let's just have fun, just like a kid. Kids don't necessarily like schedules or responsibilities. They don't want to do their chores. They just want to play in the playground. Well, that's that inner free spirit that we've got. And we all have it a little bit different. Mine might be more about play. Yours might be more about humor. It all just depends. But bringing forward your free spirit, calling it forward and honoring it. And I promise you it's there. It may be buried in darkness, or there may be parts of it that have fallen into darkness, but I promise you, you've got that free spirit, that sweet, wonderful, innocent little child and child parts of you. They're there. The point is, when we allow them to come forward and shine, and we listen to them and start to, your free spirit, and start to honor its guidance for you, that can make the biggest difference in filling you with light. So even when you think about the term burnout, right? Burned out, the candle is out, the light is out. It's black, it's dark, it's carbonated, all that kind of stuff. So there's darkness, but you bring that free spirit, you're bringing that joyful, carefree, fun-loving, pleasure-seeking light forward to fill that darkness, to reignite you, to light you up and trigger your passions to come forward. Here's the reason, and I've said this, I believe I've said this before. Again, people think that the free spirit is not important for survival. That is garbage. That is BS. It is vital. If you didn't need your free spirit, you wouldn't have a free spirit. We all have inner free spirits. Our free spirits are vital for us to feel alive. And if anything that burnout represents, you don't feel alive. You don't feel like you're thriving. You feel exhausted and irritated and overwhelmed and done with life. Your free spirit is the part of you that can reignite that and bring that back into you. And honoring what it does for you, even if your practical mind, your impresario thinks, well, that's not practical. No, it is whatever your free spirit is telling you to do. Trust it. You can even ask your free spirit, how can you help me feel more alive? What can I do that would feel so good for you and would feel so good for me too? And whatever that free spirit tells you, do it. Because I promise what it'll do is it's going to fill you with more energy to then move forward with whatever tasks your impresario is saying, yeah, we really need to focus on this. Or your sovereign is saying, yeah, let's do what feels right for you. We really need to set our boundaries and really honor who we are, and do and really respect ourselves so that we can make a bigger difference in the world and fulfill our mission. The free spirit can bring forward more of that fuel that will fuel that engine of your life, and help the show get on the road again and help you feel so good doing it. Okay. So there you go. Burnout as it pertains to the Change Light system, your X powers and your M powers, and how you can start to heal from burnout by recognizing the X powers that have been causing you, that have caused you to get to this point, the three in these different ways, these three different types, and then also the M powers and how they can be brought forward more to help you heal from that burnout and really feel alive and happy and joyful and energized again. I hope this is helpful. Please do, if you enjoy this, please do check out my community and the course. You can learn all these techniques and more. I haven't even shared any of the techniques. They're like all in the course. Amazing techniques that can really help you navigate through any kind of situation in your life. I've been doing this work for like 12, 13 years now. So I know it works, and I work with people all over the world. So this stuff works, and I hope you'll give it a try. Just go to community.changelight.world. Okay, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you, and I will see you again